Hi, I'm Father Joseph Mary, and welcome back to A Simple Word, where we reflect on the gospel for the coming Sunday. When the first missionaries came to Alberta, Canada, they were savagely opposed by a young chief of the Cree Indians named Mascapitun. But eventually, Mascapitun responded to the preaching of the missionaries, and he accepted Jesus Christ. He became a Christian. Shortly afterward, a member of the Blackfoot tribe killed Mascapitun's father. So Mascapitun rode into the village where the murderer lived and demanded that the murderer be brought before him. Confronting the guilty man, he said, "You have killed my father. So now you must be my father. You shall ride my best horse and wear my best clothes." In utter amazement and remorse, his enemy replied in tears, "My son, now you have killed me." The savage mercy of Mascapitun had killed something in his enemy's heart. It had put to death his hatred. But more than this, it had awakened something. Mercy had awakened love. How could Mascapitun have responded to the death of his father with such incredible forgiveness? Because he took seriously the words of Jesus in this Sunday's gospel. How seriously do we take them? Following the discussion about how to confront a brother who sins against us, Peter approaches Jesus looking for specifics. He asks, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Now there's a context to Peter's question. It was the popular teaching of the Jewish rabbis that a man could be forgiven 3 times, but after the 4th offense, forgiveness should be denied. This was based on the teachings of the prophet Amos, who taught that God's forgiveness extends to 3 offenses, but that he visits the sinner with punishment upon the 4th. And certainly men shouldn't be held to a higher standard than God, right? So forgiveness was limited to 3 offenses. And so when Peter says, "Must I forgive as many as 7 times?" he thought that he was going far beyond what was expected by God. Perhaps he even thought he was being extremely generous and showing mercy. So imagine how the response of Jesus must have felt like a punch in the gut. Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 77 times. Jesus wasn't just throwing out a random number. Numbers had a very specific meaning in the Hebrew mind. 7 was the number of covenant and completion. So in saying 77 times, Jesus is demanding of his followers a mercy beyond the comprehension of men. In order to demonstrate his point, Jesus tells a parable, the story of the unforgiving servant. And as is often the case, there is a lot going on here that we lose in translation. Jesus begins, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount." The word translated huge amount are the Greek words median talenton, literally 10,000 talents. How much of a huge amount was this? We'll understand more as the story continues. Unfortunately for this debtor, he has no way of paying the huge amount that he owes. So the king commands that not only the servant, but his wife and his children should be sold into slavery, and all of his property auctioned off. This man was going to lose everything. So he falls down in desperation, literally prosekine in Greek. He prostrates himself and he begs for mercy. "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full." And what's the response of the king? Jesus says he's moved with compassion, and he lets him go. But he doesn't just let him go, he forgives the entire debt. The man walks away completely free. The story then takes a dramatic turn. The servant formerly in debt comes across a man who owed him a debt, a quote, much smaller amount. The Greek is heketon denari, 100 denarii. A denarii was the equivalent of 1 day's wage for the typical laborer, the fisherman, the field hand. A Jewish man works 6 days a week for 50 weeks in a year, and so he earned an annual wage of 300 denarii. So 100 denarii is 1/3 of a year's salary for the typical laborer. This is no small amount. This is a significant debt this man owes. So how does the man who's just been forgiven his own debt respond? He throws himself upon the servant. He starts choking him, and he demands, "Pay back what you owe." What does the poor servant do in response? He falls down again. He prostrates himself, and he begs, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back." The exact same gesture, the same words the debtor had pleaded to the king. How does the debtor respond to his plea? He refuses to show mercy. Instead, he puts the servant in prison. Jesus says that when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed. Why were these fellow servants so deeply disturbed? We said that the amount the debtor refused to pardon was 100 denarii, or 4 months' wages. If the man had continued to work as a laborer earning 300 denarii each year, after 20 years, he would have earned 6,000 denarii, the equivalent of a single talent. How much did the debtor owe? 10,000 talents. At that rate, it would have required him to work for 200,000 years to repay the debt. The point is this: the debtor was forgiven a payment he had no hope of ever repaying. Yet when he encountered a man who owed him a debt which was possible to repay, he showed no mercy. And in refusing to show mercy to his servant, the king refused to show further mercy to him. He was handed over to the torturers. And Jesus warns his disciples, "So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless you forgive your brother from your heart." These are hard words. Again, how seriously do we take these words? Most of us learn about forgiveness when we're small children. We learn to say, "I'm sorry" when we've done something wrong, and it's okay, I forgive you when someone has wronged us. But as we get older and life gets more complicated, we learn that there's much more to forgiveness than a squabble in the playground. Sometimes life hurts a lot. There's a lot of cruelty in the world, and we can be seriously hurt, physically, psychologically, even spiritually. And when we've been wounded very deeply, or someone we love has, forgiveness is often the last thing on our minds. After all, how could we forgive someone who's wounded us so grievously? What if God asked that same question to you? How could I forgive you who have wounded me so grievously? And we all have. We know it in our hearts. We know there are times in our lives when we have wounded and offended the heart of God, when we've been faithless and rebellious. And in so doing, we've incurred a debt we can never repay. And in this gospel, Jesus assures us, God will show you mercy in the same way you show mercy to others. In her diary, St. Faustina gives practical advice from Jesus on showing mercy. She writes, there are 3 ways of showing mercy. The merciful word, by forgiving and by comforting. If you can offer no word, then pray. That too is mercy. And finally, deeds of mercy. And when the last day comes, we shall be judged by this. And on this, we shall receive the eternal verdict. I'm Father Joseph Mary, and thanks for listening to A Simple Word. If you found this reflection helpful, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.